Okay, so where we really left off, the end was showing you how we ran into that issue of wanting to keep to spin this sun and keep it spinning and be able to and still have the easing, and taking the step of going into the sun symbol and putting yet another symbol inside of it. Remember, this is one of the most frequent situations where I see students end up not making a symbol when they should and getting evil tweens, is when you go inside of a symbol and want to animate something that's like looping inside of it. Just because you're inside of a symbol, whatever given timeline you're on, those golden rules still apply. So you still need to make something a symbol and make sure it's the only thing in the layer to properly animate it. So we made our raise symbol and animated it for a second, and this just will constantly loop. So when we go to the main timeline, doesn't matter how many frames we would add, it would just continuously stay spinning up in the sky like that. So that's a pretty big step of going inside of one symbol and then nesting another symbol inside of it. In fact, if I wanted to make edits to these rays, let's say I wanted to turn every other one a color, I just double clicked on that, and now you can see up here in my breadcrumb trail that I'm now 2 levels deep. From scene 1, I went inside of sun, and then I went inside of rays. I keep harping on this because this is a pretty big deal when we start doing things interactively, is understanding how you can just nest symbols within symbols. It's a lot of power there. I'll make these more of a little orangey red, and now I can go up 2 different levels, and all that sticks. So pretty cool, right? All right, the next thing we're gonna do is let's go ahead and make a new layer, and let's put it above everything. I'm gonna lock my sun layer because that's good to go. And let's name this creature. So what we're gonna do here is we are going to create a little creature that's going to run across the hilltop. So I'm going to show you a couple of different other types of animation. So far we've been doing just strictly keyframe animation, which we've seen how to move things, rotate things, scale things, then even fade things in and out, which a lot of times is all you really need, especially when you're doing interface stuff. But I'm going to show you how to do a path animation. So we're going to make something run across this curved path, which would be pretty difficult to do with keyframes. And I'm going to show you just some simple frame-by-frame animation, which sometimes you don't even need tweens if you're doing something character-wise or something pretty detailed. Let's see if I can clunk through drawing a little character, because there's 2 different aspects. You can draw whatever type of little character you want, but there's 2 different aspects that I want you to keep the same as mine. I'm going to use the classic brush tool, which right now is pretty big. So I'm going to bring my size down to, I don't know, 8. That seem good? Okay, yeah, that seems pretty good. All right, maybe even a little less. Maybe we'll go down to 5. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, because what I want is, there's 2 things. Number 1, the character needs to be small enough to like fit on the hills and run across them. All right, so I'm going to draw just a real simple little crappy ant character. And let's see, before I go any further, I'm going to, let's see, fill in this little thing. Maybe I'll make that little eyeball white, beady-eyed white thing, and fill in this as well. Whoops, I don't want that to be filled with white. I want that to be filled with the red color. I need to deselect my eyeball, choose the fill. There we go, that'll work. Okay. Now, besides your character just being small enough, I'm going to make sure I select the whole thing by region selecting around it, or choosing the actual keyframe. I'm going to make a symbol out of it. Again, F8, graphic symbol. I'm going to name it creature. But the second thing your creature needs, besides just being small enough, is it needs stick legs. All right, there's a reason that you'll see soon enough where we're going to need little stick legs, but you want your stick legs on a different layer than your body. All right, so draw your creature's body first, make a symbol out of it, which is what I just did. So I drew this weird little humped back creature. And now I'm going to go inside of the creature and I'm going to name this layer body, lock it, just leave it alone. And then I'm going to make a new layer, name it legs, probably put the legs under it. And then with that same brush tool, I'm just going to draw crappy little stick legs. Maybe you don't think they're crappy. It's great. And that's really the only two things. Okay, so I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to zoom back out. Got one leg sticking off into the ether. Doesn't really matter. If you couple the legs on the hilltop, it'll be all right. In fact, on my legs layer, I'm even going to draw a couple little antennae, little stick antennae. Here we go. I've got a creepy little creature. But when you're done creating your creature symbol on your creature layer, with a separate layer with little stick legs inside of it, go ahead and save your project. We want this cheesy creature to run across the landscape. We use a path animation to do that, because imagine just using keyframes and tweens, how you would be able to actually get this thing to run across these rolling hills. Like you could do it like maybe every 5 frames or so, you could put a keyframe and a tween and you could constantly rotate and everything, but it would be clunky, right? It definitely would be hard to make really smooth. Well, you can also animate things along a path, so we can actually tell it to go along these nice smooth curves. And so I'm going to show you how to do it. It can be a little finicky at times to actually get the path in this program and do what it's trying to do. So we'll see how it goes, but let's make that happen. So the first thing is we need a new layer above creature, and let's just name that layer path. Okay, and this path layer is where we're going to do our little path. Now, I'm going to try and go get the path from inside of the ground where we originally drew that line that made these hills. So I'm going to go inside of that ground layer and try and just copy that line and then paste it onto my path layer so I can see it. Now, if you don't have that line, you can certainly just draw, something close to it, which I'll show you in a minute. But what would be ideal is if we could go into our ground, I believe it's the ground dark one, is the one that is the actual symbol. So I'm going to unlock my ground dark layer, go to frame 30 where there's an actual keyframe and it's just light out and I can see it. And I'm going to double click to go inside of this layer. And you can see, if you look at the cursor, you can see that when you're hovering anywhere over the fill, the cursor is a little crosshairs. But then if you hover over the edge where you drew the line, you've still got the line there, it'll turn into like a little curved line. So I can click that and I can see that that's selected, and if I nudge it with shift and like the arrow key, I can see that that's selected this whole line. At least most of it. I think there's a little bit more. It has a little bit more over here. I'm going to shift select. There we go. Now I have my entire line, and I'm just going to copy that. With Command C, you can do right click and copy as well. Again, if you go inside of your ground symbol and you don't have this little curve for whatever reason and can't copy it or can't select it, that's okay. You can draw your path. It'll just be a little bit less exact. That's okay. So I copied mine, and now I don't need to be in the ground symbol anymore. So I'm going to go up here to scene 1, and I can either press the arrow or scene 1. The arrow just steps back one level at a time, but there's no multiple levels. So we go back up here, and now on the path layer, I'm going to hit paste. Doesn't matter really where I am, it's going to go on frame 1. Now notice that it doesn't paste correctly in the right spot. It is darker, which is nice, so I can see it. So I'm just going to kind of move it into place. Now, you can just click and drag something around. That works perfectly fine, but typically I like to use the arrow keys. The arrow keys move 1 pixel at a time, and then when you hold shift, they'll move 10 pixels. It just helps me get a little more exact. And a lot of times when you're doing interface work, things like that, more so than just character animation type things, you'll need to get things like pixel perfect at certain situations. So I like to nudge things around that way, but you can click and drag if you want. So ultimately, I've got this path now that is sitting here on top of my hilltops. Now, if you couldn't copy this line and weren't able to do what I did, then all you need to do is just take, in fact, I'm actually going to change the color of this path. It's still a little hard to see. I'm going to select the whole thing, and then over here in the properties panel under the color and style, I'm going to change the stroke. I'm going to change it to a bright yellow. This path isn't going to show up when we publish. It's just going to be there. Now I can see it nice and clearly. But if you can't just copy it and don't have it like that, or maybe the one you drew had a bunch of little disjointed parts or something, just use the pencil tool and make sure that in your properties panel, your pencil mode is set to smooth here. And then just be sure that you use one contiguous motion and make sure that it intersects that bottom part and make sure that it stays on the stage. But you could, in theory, just kind of draw your own path again pretty quickly. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try and stay away from like little hitches and things and stops and starts. Because it does want to be one continuous line for this path animation thing to work. But the next step, once we have our path, is there's actually a couple of different types of layers. I'll show you a couple of them. But right now, if I were to just publish this, it would look as you would expect it. All right, it's got my little creature standing there ominously on the hilltop, and it's got this yellow line just sitting there. But if we take the layer and where we name the layer path, right click it and choose guide, which is about halfway down, and that turns it into a guide layer. Now a guide layer, I'm going to lock my ground dark layer again, so I have just my path and creature layers unlocked. My guide layer, all of a sudden the icon turns into this weird little slide rule thing. And all that means is it's some other programs will call it a construction layer. It just means that whatever you put on there is not going to show up when you publish. It's ignored when you publish, but you can still put things on screen to give yourself notes, or sometimes I'll load an image and use it as a reference that a designer made of an interface that I have to rebuild or something. You know, or you could just bring in like a sketch and you could use the pen tool to kind of trace vectors over your sketch and have the sketch not show up. But if I go to publish now all of a sudden that yellow line's gone. And then now that it's a guide layer, I want you to watch what I do very carefully here. The creature layer, right now it is under it, but if I click it and drag it as if I'm going to change its position, its layer order, you see the black line gets a little darker, and there's this little white thing right here that kind of shows me I have it right now. I'm clicking and dragging, but I can put it under the path layer and it'll indent a little bit. Once I make that path layer into a guide layer, this will indent if I drag it up a little, and then it kind of catches it and it's underneath the path layer, and then that icon on the path layer changes and it turns into like this arc of little dots with a square at the end. And that's like the first step that we need to do when we're going to make a path animation. Is what we're doing is we're basically connecting the thing that we want to animate along the path to the path. And I don't remember if the path works if it's a symbol or if it has to be a basic shape, but it does work as a basic shape, so I'm going to leave it like that. So that's one situation, because we're animating the creature. This object does need to be a symbol, because we're actually going to keyframe in between this object, but the path we're going to tell it to follow doesn't necessarily need to be one. So that's one of those little 5% bend the rules there. So now that we have this ready and it's attached, and it basically is going to say, okay, I need you to follow this path, there's still a few things we need to do to set it up. Now, first off, we need to set up the keyframes in the tween. We still keyframe and tween because we're basically going to tell the animation, okay, follow this path, but during this time frame between these two keyframes. So we are going to want our creature to go not just 1 second, but the entire 3 seconds, all the way to frame 90. We're going to want our creature to traverse the hilltops for that full 3 seconds. So go ahead and put a keyframe on frame 90 on the creature layer, not on the path layer, not on both. We don't need to keyframe the path at all. It's just the creature. So I'm going to select that frame 90 on the creature layer, and I'm going to hit F6 to make a keyframe. You can use the interface or the right-click menu. You want to be slow-pokey about it. And then once you've made a keyframe of your creature on the creature layer, then you can right-click anywhere in between those two and choose Create Classic Tween. And I'm going to show you how to finish this path animation, then we'll see how it works for you guys. So again, we just got the path drawn on a path layer that we right-clicked, made it a guide layer, took our creature layer and kind of nudged it under it, got our path in place on that layer, and then our creature, we just set up 2 keyframes and a tween. Now, I'm not actually going to change the easing on this because I'm going to want my creature to just carry across the entire time. Plug in here. So once we have the tween, it doesn't automatically know to travel along the path just by telling it to tween, but it does. Notice how it's kind of just moving. It's just kind of shifting through the air. All right, what we have to do is on either end, on the first keyframe and on the last one, we need to attach the center point of the symbol. I'm going to get the move tool to the very end of the line. Now, I believe this has a hard time working if the ends of the line go outside of the stage area. Remember how we can clip the stage like this? So you may have to adjust your line or maybe even just select part of it and delete it if it's outside the stage area. What we should be able to do is see it tries to snap to it, right? So if I can snap this center point of my creature to the very beginning of the line, and then on the other keyframe, on frame 90, drag my creature way over and snap that to the very end. And once you've done that, then it should follow. So now if I run my movie, little creature scooting across the landscape, but nicely smooth in the sense that if I were to try and do this with a keyframe, it would be like impossible to get that kind of smoothness going across these curves. So go ahead and try that. There's some other things we're going to do to this. But another thing is if you select the tween in the middle, notice that there's some path options. There's orient to path, scale along path, color along path. I'm going to choose orient to path. Now I'm going to run it. And now all of a sudden, it's a lot more realistic. Now instead of just scooting on its butt, my character looks like he's leading his little antennae and is actually rotating along with the path, which is pretty cool. So it actually tries to just keep your object oriented, following it along. Which again would be really, really difficult to pull off with just individual keyframes. Got to that by just selecting the tween after I had set it all up. By selecting the tween of the character, choose orient to path. All right, that's set up. Now, so that's really path animation. It takes a minute to set up the first time, but it's relatively easy to do once you figure it out. Just you got to remember to make that guide and indent the layer under it. You don't keyframe the path at all. That can just be a straight object and then or a straight shape, and then you keyframe in between the thing you want to animate along the path, and you just need to snap to the edges. Now I'll show you the other path things in a minute. In fact, actually, yeah, we'll do the other part first. But first, it is nice seeing the creature as I do this, scurry across the landscape, the orient to path, very cool. Even looked a little different as I scroll through here. Yeah, that's weird. Notice, here's another reason to check things in the browser. Notice that when I look at it through the browser, the head of my character is always leading the way, right? But then if I'm scrubbing through it on the timeline, it leads the way, and then all of a sudden it starts doing a wheelie and just kind of scooting along its little tail end there. So it's a little bit different. Just another example. You always want to check your animation in the browser because things can be a little bit differently when it actually renders. It's totally weird, but just, you know, always check it in the browser. That's what the user is going to see. So now I'm going to show you why I made you do little crappy stick legs. Is now we're going to do a character walk cycle with just frame by frame animation. So what I want you to do is go back to frame 1. And when I say go to somewhere, that basically means take the blue playhead and just drag it to that spot. But if I say select something, it usually means like actually select it on the stage or select the keyframe. So what we want to do is we want to go to frame 1 just so we're over a keyframe on the creature layer. And we want to double click to go inside of the creature. All right, so we're inside of the creature's symbol, and we've got the body layer and the legs layer. And part of mine is off the stage, so I'm going to click this little clip content outside the stage button again, because I had to move it out there so it would center to my line apparently. Now here's what I want you to do. We're going to end up making a little 5-frame walk cycle with our legs. But so everyone right now, just making sure that you have the body on one layer and the legs on a separate layer. If you don't, then you need to delete your legs and do it that way. Because what I want you to do is go out to frame 5 on both layers. So I'm going to just click and select both of these frames. And the first thing we need to do is add frames. So I'm just going to hit F5 to add frames out to that level. You can right click and choose insert frames, or you can use this little frame or keyframe thing right on the timeline, whatever works best for you. But I do recommend that whatever one you choose, oops, I accidentally added a keyframe when I showed you the button. Whichever one you choose, continue to you know, practice and just get efficient with it, because we'll just get going faster and faster as we just add frames and keyframes on things. All right, so we've added frames, so now I've got 5 seconds of animation. Now, on the second frame of my legs layer, I want to put a keyframe, and then I want to delete. So I'm going to use F6 to put a keyframe in, and then I'm just going to hit the delete key, which deletes my legs and even my little antenna, and gives me what's referred to as a blank keyframe, which a keyframe with anything in it has this little black circle, and a blank keyframe has a little empty circle. All right, you can even see the shading of the actual frames change as well. All right, so then once you have your legs are keyframed in on frame 1, and then we have a blank keyframe on frame 2. Again, I did that just by hitting F6 to insert a keyframe, and then hitting delete to get rid of the objects that were on that keyframe. Now I want a blank keyframe on each of these other ones, so really I'm going to select all 3 of these remaining frames and hit F6 to add keyframes. You can do them one at a time manually, whatever you want, but again, I'm really showing you the fastest way to do these things. So I just selected all 3 and hit F6 to make keyframe, and it made them all. But what you want to end up with is 5 separate keyframes. One on frame 1 that has your legs in it, and then 4 individual empty ones. So take a moment, get that set up, and then we're going to make our little walk cycle magic happen. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on and just show you what I want you to do next. So now, basically, on each of the 4 empty keyframes, on frames 2, 3, 4, and 5, on each one, I want you to redraw your legs. And what that's going to do, you can go ahead and watch mine for a moment if you want. I'm going to draw my little antenna again, is because you're drawing them manually, there is no way that you're going to draw them the exact same way twice. So we're going to get the effect of little wiggling stick legs. And it's going to be a little walk cycle. So all I'm doing is moving along the timeline, one little blank keyframe at a time, and inside of each one, I'm just drawing. I have 4 crappy stick legs, maybe you have 2, 6, 8, have a couple of antennae. And in each keyframe, and this is basically old school animation, drawing each individual frame, but there is some times where you'd want to use that. All right, so I've redrawn mine. If I scrub through the animation, I can see it's all wiggly, okay, but this will continuously loop on the inside of this, just like our sunrise did, or just like our sun did inside of it. And no matter how long this runs across for the entire 3 seconds, these little legs are going to be wiggling like that. So now I'm going to run mine in the browser and check out my little wiggling creature. Yes. It's going so fast that it actually looks like it's lifelike little legs running all over the place, these little antennas. Very exciting, right? Look at that little guy go.